Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
Nah, that's the golden rule. A lawsuit here, a bailout there, but hey, don't breathe the Utah air. Hype train, full speed ahead.
So good, eh?
That's what they said. More reactors, more mistakes. When it derails, guess who pays?
Small modular reactor hype trains. Train. Love that song, man. That's fantastic. I'm Dana. I hope you're doing well. Always takes me a minute to get up and running. My apologies. You can call into these live shows at 709-589-4406. Here we go, I guess. Well, we got a poll there. Let's touch the poll. Should nuclear students, instead of the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language, be sacrificed at Fukushima nuclear meltdowns? That's a fantastic poll. Got a few of these headlines we got to get through before we jump into today's stories. Some legacy headlines. Fukushima Daiichi has contaminated the biggest body of water on the planet. The biggest body of water on the planet and everything in between. They're crazy. They picked up 30 million one-ton bags, but they never stopped growing food. It's insane. Wall Street Journal: extreme contamination found in the trench at Fukushima at a 2 billion atoms a liter, millions of times above limits. Like, putting that connotation there, millions of times above limits. What I should say is a disaster. It's a nuclear nightmare. It's a no-go. It's a nuclear wasteland. Radiation of 750 million atoms seeded Becquerels. A Becquerel is when an atom pulses energy in every direction, almost at the speed of light every second. So you got to have a physical anthropogenic man-made atom to produce a Becquerel. So 750 million becquerels, a liter of cesium-134. These are absurd numbers. We never heard tell of pre-Fukushima anywhere on the planet. 1.6 billion atoms, a liter of cesium-137 in the same samples. It'll have uranium, plutonium, americium, curium, etc., for 1,000 times. It's not just cesium. It's not just a couple of isotopes. It's the full range. Combined 1.8 billion atoms was recorded of gamma. So they're only measuring gamma, not measuring alphas or neutrons or betas, and they're only measuring, allegedly, the cesium. Sample came from a trench near the number 2 reactor turbine building, which is on the ocean side of the reactor. TEPCO is searching for the water source. People are insane. They're actually insane. They can't figure out where the source is coming from, but on day 5, this was a picture that circulated worldwide in the media. Showed 4 reactors were in another dimension. All-time high radiation levels in the wells at the Fukushima plant, 40 meters, 120 feet from the Pacific. Now the wells are right up by the ocean too. 1.1 billion of strontium-90 per cubic meter. Fear the highly contaminated waters leak. Every time you hear the word leaking, you should consider spitting on a nuclear academic. Being allowed to flow into the sea. That's a good word, flow. I can kind of accept that word. I still don't do it justice, but when I hear leaking, I'm not very impressed. Now, if you're honest, anywhere within 100 miles of a nuclear plant, this is what the supermarket would look like. But Fukushima is extraordinary. So these black bags, when you see them, they don't do it justice, obviously, right? There was 30 million one-ton black bags. So the accumulation here still would make up a ton. And that's just that little rectangle. But it's symbiotic. It's supposed to put you in the right frame of reality. Lethal threat from Fukushima highly radioactive waters flown into the Pacific. A lethal threat from the highly radioactive waters flowing into the Pacific. Top cancer doctor, nuclear radiation, most carcinogenic thing that exists. For large animals and humans, right? And any kind of human, babies, teens, adults. But for birds and insects, or mammals and animals and everything else, this stuff is catastrophic. They're getting full body x-rays all day long in the meadows and the forest. That wipes out the biota. That's why you don't see total estimated cesium release into the air is triple the amount published 2 months ago, 2012. Strontium-90 after 1,000 days increases to 100-to-1 ratio of cesium-137, which attacks the heart and everything else, muscles, organs, thyroid, stuff like that. And strontium is a bone seeker, which means the species and children and humans, everybody else is producing radioactive stem cells. And it doesn't have to be in you to attack you. It could be, like cesium could be 600 feet away from you and still wreck your health through the gamma shine, right? So these pictures are just meant to fill in the gap that they're not acknowledging, but we clearly, they acknowledge in other ways, like 30 million one-ton bags, which was 3% of the land where they picked up 2.5 centimeters, 1 inch of the topsoil. Land under a Fukushima reactor building at risk of turning into liquid. They're forced to spray copious, enormous amounts of water at the buildings. They can't get near them. And so the whole site becomes liquefaction. It's like, there's so many facets to each one of these stories, it would take a whole show to explain the significance of each of these. They are turning ground into quicksand at the Fukushima plant. Engineers warn reactor's unit may topple. So it really does give you context. You're talking about 190-foot buildings could topple over, for instance, right? The reactors were completely destroyed. So in 2013, this is what reactor 3 to your left and 4 behind me would have looked like. And they pretend that they were in those buildings. Don't ever forget they done that. And now they got to keep the lie alive, so now they're going to claim nothing has happened because they had went ahead and done that, where they pretend they're on top of reactor 4 behind me. When you pick up 30 million one-ton bags, it's just simply meant to trick the complacent into going in there, move them back into a nuclear meltdown, a wasteland, a nuclear wasteland. Fukushima worker a big froggy, making it hard to talk. Fukushima worker, I'm worried about the pressure forcing water up through cracked ground at the nuclear plant. The levels now are rising on the mountainside. I'm worried about pressure forcing water up through cracked ground at the nuclear plant. That means you've got to abandon the plant. And to put that in the context, if just reactor 1 blew up or just reactor 3 blowing up means you can't get back on the site because you have around 8 or 9 reactor cores at the top of each building. And that's spread over the entire site. So there's lethal doses everywhere. So eventually they were sending in remote controlled bulldozers that was bulldozing the top surface, the pavement and everything else away from the buildings so they can try to get some control of the site, right? But this was the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society that's still ongoing today. It's an incredibly coward industry. That's one thing is mindlessly simple to quantify. The melted core cracked the containment vessel. There really isn't any containment. That was Stephen Starr. He had done quite a presentation. We haven't played that forever. It's about 35 minutes, right? And what he was trying to do was explain some of the deception that the industry was using for its entire legacy to manipulate people. It's one of the very few people, really, that we've ever seen actually attempt to come out I guess that would help. Wrong one. Too many keyboards. Just let me show you that little part. Which is quite important. So you hear the connotations of bananas all the time, right? Well, think of a gram of radiation, which is man-made, we're talking about clearly, right? And so think of an atom, which pulses energy. The energy it pulses a becquerel. So 1 becquerel is an atomic disintegration per second. Now, it could do disintegrations for 1 billion years. Or decays, or whatever they want to call it. It's better to call it what it is. It's a detonation at the speed, almost just shy of the speed of light. So when you call it a disintegration or a decay, you're misrepresenting what's going on. And that's why the industry framed it that way. And it's easy to fall into that trap. But a curry is 37 billion explosions a second. So cesium-137 has 88 curries. That's 88 times 37 billion explosions per second. So naturally occurring radionuclides in food, and you can see the potassium-40 in bananas. So The potassium 40 is 71 10 millionths of a curie per gram. 71 10 millionths of 37 billion. And cesium-137 is 88 times 37 billion, or for strontium-90, it's 140 times, over 4 trillion detonations, explosions, almost at the speed of light, per second. So when you conflate a banana with a potato chip, or a anthropogenic man-made radiation like cesium or strontium, and compare it to potassium, potato chips, this is the lie the industry likes to use. So 2 grams of cesium-137, or the exclusion zone in Chernobyl was 104 curies per square mile. That's like a paper towel compared to Fukushima. So water, then you have, the zooplankton, the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, the little tiny microscopic fish, small fry, large fish. The magnification as it comes up to me and you is catastrophic. See? And shellfish, so if you eat codfish or tuna or herring or whatever, and compare that to shellfish like a mussel or an oyster or a clam, and so the shellfish, because they're microscopic feeders, they bioaccumulate the radiation 125,000% more than a fish would. Even though you have so you can imagine how bad it really is. But if you're eating food from the Japan or the nuclear wasteland, which is Japan, it's equivalent in many ways to eating shellfish. So please don't eat that stuff. It's very, very harmful forever. And you are not immune, no matter how wealthy or how popular or how handsome or pretty or how privileged you are. You are not immune to this stuff. Everybody has the same vulnerability. Please, for goodness sakes, don't bring a microscope or a magnifying glass to the supermarket and check where your product is coming from until you learn before you bring it home. And if you accidentally bring it home, you find out it's from Japan, don't give it away to somebody and dispose of it. 76 trillion atoms of plutonium-239 released from Fukushima is 23,000 times higher than previously announced. Now, the problem with these stories like this is the industry refuses to acknowledge the reactors have lost their inventories, which is 4 decades of reactor cores, and the significance of that is life and death. So this is plutonium-239 dispersal, but it's only based on a fraction of the inventories that were lost. A fraction of the nuclear meltdowns that had taken place, which was 36 roughly, very large reactor cores of pure uranium, pure plutonium. Each one was equal to 100 Chernobyls. So plutonium-239, now the model to your over here is based on 20 days. That's plutonium-239 dispersal. There was another model, again based on a fraction of the inventories that were actually lost, the reactor cores, was neptunium-239. That model is also based on 20 days and 21 days. But that neptunium-239 decays to plutonium-239 in 2.5 days. And so that model you're looking at is based on 20 days. So there's one more piece to this puzzle I got to show you. Oh. It's okay, we got it here. All right, so everybody's breathing in plutonium. Every bird, every mammal, every animal, every human. So this study, 1996, from Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico, Dr. Raymond Gilmedy, but that is the military, the Navy, the U.S. Navy Research Institute. And they had 144 beagle dogs, and death from radiation occurred 1.5 to 5.4 years. Tumors, a lung, skeleton, and liver began about 3 years after the exposures. And bone tumors in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. Skeleton tumors. Lung tumors in 46 were the second most common cause of death. And liver tumors. So bone, then lung, then liver. This is just from a single isotope. And tumors in these three organs often occurred in the same animal and were competing causes of death. And that the finding in dogs suggests similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to plutonium-238. But it was discovered that the human kidneys are 50 times less efficient than an animal's kidneys at removing plutonium. So what that means is the humans are 50 times more vulnerable than the dogs, and the dogs died in every one of the studies, right? But the same institution, Loveless Respiratory Research Institute, Dr. Raymond Gilmedy in New Mexico, Albuquerque, had another study on curium isotopes are the major byproduct in the irradiated nuclear reactor fuel. Forget the fact of alpha-emitting radionuclide inventories. It's so think because you think a lot of people are bombarded with cesium-137 in the literature, and curium isotopes dwarf the inventories of cesium. So they're the major byproduct. Now, curium isotope, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. So curium-244, for instance, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. And plutonium killed all the animals in the researches of multiple tumors. That should make you feel all warm and giddy inside. It's surreal that the industry is able to do what they're doing and people are continuing to grow food in the nuclear wasteland. They're calling it a no-go, a temporary no-go zone. They're refusing to be even a speck honest. Japan's leader, and most don't know, but Reactor 1 melted down in 5 hours. Reactor 3 melted earlier than reported. And so like what happens is if you don't circulate the water, it'll melt down. It starts melting down within an hour. So that they were all doomed to melt down. And they had another issue where the tsunami ran through the buildings. So the tsunami ran through building 1, 2, 3, and 4 reactors, and the common spent fuel pool behind it on the same street, which had reactor cores from all 6 reactors. Reactor 5 and 6, as far as I know, the tsunami never ran through those 2 buildings, but we know from redacted pictures that were released on the year of the 10th anniversary, 2021, late January, and I'd done a presentation last month on, you'll find it on my site, 736 mystery pictures. And it'll show you the common spent fuel pool completely redacted. And Reactor 6 completely redacted. And another section up at the southwest corner redacted. Get your radioactive food. Make sure to make everybody sick. Nearly 5,000 nuke plant workers suffering internal radiation exposure. I know what you're saying, but Dana, they had paper suits on. Yeah, it's sad because that's how they trick people going into a nuclear wasteland, because they were the homeless and destitute and victims of society, immigrants who don't speak the language, which was one of the reasons we have this poll tonight. Should nuclear students, instead of the homeless victims, be sacrificed? Which is what they called happened to the dogs I showed you earlier. That was being sacrificed. So these are not nuclear plant workers per se. This is 5,000 homeless and destitute and victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language. Mysterious black substance at 1 million plus atoms per kilogram of cesium. You got to multiply it by 66.6. So 66 million per square meter in Minnesota. They move people and children back in there after 7 years. So this industry is nobody's friend. This industry hates every species on top of that. It's actually targeting you. As I showed you last night, every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. That means they're targeting you. The degenerate International Atomic Energy Agency today admitted there is no such thing as safe level of radiation. And that the standards that they're using at the International Atomic Energy Agency, the allowable radiation standards are based on benefit, not safety. There is no benefit. Right? There's no benefit to anthropogenic man-made radiation. So their entire 80-year legacy is 100% predicated upon deception. Like this entire planet now has been compromised because the International Atomic Energy Agency are setting the regulatory exposures for your communities, your schools, your hospitals, your loved ones, your cancer victims. How can you ever look them in the face without contempt? How does that work? How after seeing just that one story, how can you have a minutia of faith in this traitorous industry, this genocide, omnicide industry? Get your radioactive cabbage and cheese, milk. There you go. Curium-244 detected for the first time outside the Fukushima plant. Well, normally, because you have so many isotopes there, you can't read any of them. Requires a lead shield 20 times thicker than plutonium. .500 times greater fluence of neutrons. So curium is a neutron emitter on top of that. And curium, as Dr. Raymond Gilmedy from Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico, academic studies show you that curium is the biggest byproduct of the radiator fuel rods. Not iodine, not cesium. Don't get me wrong, they're terrible stuff. But curium. That is a terrifying. Just that one story right there is probably one of the most. About 2 inches of lead for. Compared to 0.1 inch for plutonium. 500 times greater fluence of neutrons. Emits 500 times more. That is a frightening and appalling statement. And this industry couldn't exist if the population understood even a fraction of what you're going to see tonight. This industry has no right to exist. There's no way that the species can survive the emissions from all the nuclear plants' fuel pools, let alone all the catastrophic releases and dumps and events. The legacy of this industry is absurd. It's massive. We have to be reasonable. We have to deal with this. We can't keep pretending everything I'm showing you is not real. The world needs to grow a set. Doing what I'm doing is not, the industry doesn't have enough people to pick on, so I'm getting brutalized constantly. Government simulation shows radioactive plume of Krypton-85 over Tokyo. It's got a very short half-life, but it was enormous amount. It's very energetic, and the damage is permanent. And it can easily make its way to North America, and it did. Over Tokyo, March the 15th, when reactor number 3, when MOX exploded. It's the perfect genocide, omnicide machine is radioactive fallout. Water with nuclear fuel coming up from the ocean off the Fukushima coast. Water with nuclear fuel. Nuclear fuel. Not radioactive fallout, but nuclear fuel coming up from the ocean floor off the Fukushima coast. So this was the fuel assemblies getting ejected right out of some of the reactors, right? And some of it landed in the ocean. Lots of it landed on the tsunami debris and got carried out into the ocean before the fuel. So the fuel got dragged offshore. It's the worst case scenario. Every facet of the story is the worst case scenario. Fukushima was extraordinarily, because of the tsunami debris, in that first year, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, was the radioactive debris from Japan. It was 2,000 square miles. It was torn off the 1,200 miles of coastline. A lot had sunk, right? But there was a patch out there at 2,000 square miles, the size of Texas. Officials, hot material, 7 billion atoms a kilogram of cesium found 15 kilometers from Fukushima. Most likely came from Unit 3. Over 7,500 atoms a kilogram of plutonium and americium. So you have to multiply it by 66.6 to get a square meter. So these kinds of numbers are just, my goodness. One Fukushima may destroy a whole country, and there's many ways for it to happen, and then they end up poisoning you everywhere. There's nowhere you can go to Japan, you're not going to eat radioactive food. Japan wants you to think only that cesium-137 exists. And the nuclear industry, of course, and mainstream media, universities are all on board to manipulate you. They don't care about us. They resent us. They have contempt for us. Like the plot of a summer horror flick. All along Canada's Pacific coastline, mussels, and every other species, we went out and done research expeditions for 6 years. 4 to 5 months of a year without coming ashore. And the mussels were completely gone by 2014. You couldn't find them. You were finding little baby ones, but you weren't finding the adults. You weren't finding any shells on the beaches. And these beaches are made of shells over millions of years. Bodies are swollen by cancerous tumors. Muscles with cancer. Unprecedented mutations allowing cancer to spread from one species to another like a virus. So you heard of the bird flu. They didn't mention bird flu back then, by the way. Cancer spreading from one species to another like a virus. That's the craziest, the most lunatic statement imaginable. But it's real though, is the madness of that statement. It's so absurd, eh? In Japan, in 2019, a study, congenital heart disease operations rose 14.2% per 100,000 children. So 14,200 children needed open heart surgery for congenital heart disease. And you can be sure there was a lot of congenital... Well, like they knew this at Chernobyl, right? Look up the documentary Chernobyl Hearts, and you'll see the British foundations paying for open heart surgery even today for children because of Chernobyl, which happened to close 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom. So 9,400 farms closed 3,000 kilometers away. So how bad would Fukushima be when each reactor was 100 Chernobyls and there's 36 reactor cores in the 4 buildings, in the 8 fuel pools at the 4 buildings? A 100% death rate of baby seals on the California coast. None have survived. Starving, suffering from a shortage of food in the Pacific Ocean. Extremely thin, we call emaciated. And then you have all kinds of illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries from radiation. All sorts of illnesses, infections. And it's getting worse, 2016. Nuclear has to be, we got to deal with this industry. This is your enemy. You're worried about aliens, and there's nothing wrong with that. You're worried about war, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you better start worrying about what's already provable, which is an 80-plus year legacy of misery. Official report, West Coast hit with 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129. So that's never going to go away. And we're talking about per liter. And as you understand, I'm sure if you made it this far in the video, that if you got one isotope in a liter, you're going to have all the other ones. But just the 220 million atoms, which is not a number anyone would have perceived pre-Fukushima, per liter, over Canada, United States, for instance, the entire continent, is enough to saturate the thyroid glands of every species. Which means every species, every human, every other species, is producing radioactive hormones permanently for at least 150 million years. But when you talk about these types of numbers, you got to appreciate it doesn't travel by itself, so you have to, it'd be appropriate to assume that they're producing radioactive stem cells for the rest of their lives too, every species. So it's a double-edged sword, because every species is dependent upon hormones for every function in their body, and stem cells for the genetic superior genes that you used to have before the nuclear industry showed up. It destroyed the genes of every species, and that leads to a compromised immune system. So a flu theoretically could take out a lot of people, but it doesn't have to be a modified flu, just a flu, because your immune system is so compromised, It's producing so many white blood cells because of the radiation that's in your body. It's trying to deal with the effects of that every second. For the elderly and the young, when the flu comes along, it could easily overwhelm the remainder of their immune system. Highly radioactive glass rained on Tokyo, with 500 trillion atoms a kilogram found. Significant consequence for human health, and changes the understanding of the disaster. So when you start to add everything up that I already showed you tonight, for instance, which is only a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of this story. It's some of the logistics, but it's the evidence. We have so much evidence. Denial is not an option. Billions of pieces of Fukushima nuclear fuel is spread pretty much. Now, the fuel is splitting atoms. So billions of pieces have spread everywhere, and they're splitting atoms forever. It's truly frightening. Wherever there's cesium, there's plutonium. Wherever there's plutonium or cesium or any other isotope, there's curium. The atomic bomb had 1 pound of uranium. Fukushima has 30 million pounds. Each reactor had at least 6 million pounds. The common spent fuel pool would have had another 11 million pounds. And abundant quantities of plutonium, which killed all the animals and all the research, by the government themselves, right? By the Navy. Tokyo neighbor cesium approaching levels found in Fukushima. The Chiba, which is 20 kilometers away from metropolitan Tokyo, is basically joined on to Tokyo. Incinerator dust was at 70,000 atoms. And that's such an important facet to the story, because it is true that the sewage is too radioactive to get rid of, that the ashes from the incinerators is too radioactive to get rid of. And you can't destroy it by incinerating it on top of that. The water from the reclamation facilities is too radioactive. The sediment from the water filtration facilities is too radioactive to get rid of. And we have an enormous amount of documentation up on that, by the way. High levels of radioactive material found in Tokyo. 170,000 atoms a kilogram in slag, which is the dehydrated sewage. Post-Fukushima horror. Severe impact on oceanic environment. Unpredictable amount of damage to the Pacific. Fundamental to reproduction of humans. Japan simply dumping the nuclear waste into the sea. Yeah, you can't put it in tanks. The tanks allegedly were all filled in 2013, by the way, from the aquifer. The ELP system wasn't completed until 2015. The Arriva, which was the French version of the ELP system, was completed allegedly within 100 days or something, but they never turned it on, because if you turn it on, if you start, you can never step over the pipes coming from the tanks. But the tanks were empty. The tanks were full of water, but that was just water to stop us shifting during earthquakes. You couldn't put this, you can't store this kind of radiation with multiple sieverts per liter. You can't store that. You can't stay on the site. You can only fill up one tank, and then you can't build any more tanks, because you have so much accumulated in one tank, and then you risk a criticality in the bottom of the tank, because you have gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas sediment gathering up right away in the bottom of the tank. You couldn't use a real ice wall, because the ice will cause the neutrons to reflect, and then that could cause a criticality, because you can't just have one element. You can't just have gammas or alphas or neutrons or betas flowing, where the ice wall was too. You're going to have all the elements there, which means you're going to get criticality, and that'll burn a hole through the. Why would you use an ice wall when you can build a real wall? The ice wall was the opposite of what you do, because you risk the ice reflecting the neutrons emissions, which means you're going to get a criticality on the ice wall. But there's no bottom, there's no top to it. There's no way to contain it. And, they have the typhoons down there. And so you're talking about an enormous amount of water running on the site itself, right down into the site. So anything the ice wall might have slowed down will get washed immediately below the ice wall, which is the design of the site. The design of the nuclear sites is to build them up on shale. And that way, if they have a meltdown, they got to use an enormous amount of water. It washes down through the shale. That's the design of these sites. That's their plan. And then they're usually built on a riverbed. So it'll wash down through the shale to the riverbed, and the riverbed will flush it out into the Great Lakes or your rivers, or the River Rhine, say for France's reactor, or out into the oceans. This industry is designed to wipe out the species. It has to happen at some point, just from the fuel pools. Once you have accidents, these are catalysts, these are pulse events. And Fukushima was the worst kind of pulse event conceivable. Iodine-131 levels rise 350 kilometers from Fukushima at a sewage plant. So, there's an enormous amount of evidence that you got to put into the equation. So everything I'm showing you up to this point here has to go into the equation. And it's just a fraction, not even of a percent, a fraction of a percent that I'm introducing you to. Iodine-131 in Tokyo, 10 to 12 sewage plants tested positive in December. And the significance of that in December is that it has such a short half-life, then it meant that there was an ongoing criticality, an ongoing chain reaction, an ongoing nuclear meltdown, which means like a nuclear meltdown burning at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. It's consuming water, it's consuming rocks, it's consuming steel and cement and anything, mud, whatever, at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. You can throw a moose at that, and the moose will turn atomize in aerosol, and ionize and radiate it, and turn into a radioactive plume. So imagine this. It doesn't need oxygen to burn forever at this temperature. It's consuming everything. So it's the worst type of a dirty bomb, where it never stops emitting catastrophic amounts of radioactive fallout forever. Everything it touches, it turns into a new isotope of radioactive fallout. It's like the whole story is it's insane. It's like setting off a nuclear weapon every day of emissions. Just a single nuclear meltdown would have that particular attribute. And people not somehow, but through social engineering, it's like The Simpsons and SpongeBob and the Hulk and Spider-Man and everything else, in increments over decades, have been desensitized, are not, through the social engineering, are incapable, for some reason. Clearly there's good reasons, the social engineering. I say because that's the horror that we now live in, is that they knew this was happening, and TV programs like The Simpsons, like SpongeBob for the kids. I mean, really, SpongeBob, that's from the Bikini Islands. Yeah, we radiated, we blew up the Bikini Islands, but look at all the wonderful little cartoons we got for the kids. I mean, you really got to be some sick people to participate in that one. And the industry is no shortage of sick. They have an abundance of sick people. Tokyo government finds iodine-131 levels up to quadruple cesium levels in the water reclamation centers. The biggest byproducts are going to be curium isotopes, not cesium, not iodine. And so they can't get rid of the sediment. That story in July 18, 2001, was they had 50,000 one-ton bags of sediment from water filtration. It was so radioactive they couldn't get rid of it, which meant all the water taps, all the shower, all the washers and dryers were incredibly radioactive from this high-level radiation going through the pipes. You're supposed to abandon Tokyo, 36 million people, metropolitan Tokyo. And they picked up just hundreds of thousands of one-ton bags of radioactive fallout in Tokyo. They can't get rid of the sewage because it's too radioactive. They can't get rid of the garbage legally, but they do it. They can't get rid of the ashes from the garbage because it's too radioactive. And they acknowledge this. They can't get rid of the sediment from water filtration facilities because it's too radioactive. They got supermarkets at 40,000 microsieverts. They got 28 million atoms per square meter after a rainfall in Tokyo. Like the evidence of Tokyo, I can do a whole show on it, on just the documentation of radioactive fallout. It's impossible that people are living there. You would never, because the industry is it's 100% corrupt. There's not a shred of morality in the entire industry. It's 100% corruption. And anybody there that does have pains of conscience got to keep their pie hole shut. Yellow rain recently reported in Tokyo also happened after Chernobyl. The government assured the residents it was pollen, but if you go back and look at the tsunami footage over the couple of days where people were stranded, it's snowing. It wasn't radioactive pollen; it was radioactive fallout. Tokyo drinking water unsafe. So when they say it's unsafe for infants, it's unsafe for everybody. Then they pulled back on that the next day and said everything was okay, even though they passed out water. But the reality of it was a massive plume came through Tokyo. And we know a single rainfall was at 26 million atoms per square meter of cesium-137. These are just unbelievable numbers. We know the fog is at 4,000 atoms per kilogram. The morning dew. It never goes away. It's always brought back to the surface, too. The trees are all radioactive pollen, of course. Comparison with X-rays and CAT scans are meaningless. Inhaling particles increases the radiation exposure by a factor of 1 trillion. By a factor of 1 trillion. Inhaling it or eating it. Hot radioactive particles in Seattle at 50% the levels seen in Tokyo latches onto the lung tissues. Well, you don't just have to breathe it in, you're drinking it, you're breathing it in. You can't get rid of the sewage. That means everybody's radioactive. You can't get rid of the sediment from the water filtration facilities, also means everybody's radioactive. You can't get rid of the ashes from the incinerators. Like, it's so heartbreaking. The whole story I'm gutted. Every day I'm gutted after I do these shows. International Atomic Energy Agency today admitted there is no such thing as a safe level of radiation, that the standards are based on natural, not man-made. So how goodness gracious can people look the International Atomic Energy in the eye and without contempt? How does that work? And how is that not criminal? Because it's not illegal to poison you with radiation, anthropogenic man-made radiation. And Congress and parliaments and the Diet in Japan, the governments, don't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radiation. That's why they do it to you in the hospitals, right? But that's also why every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms, because it's not illegal to poison you. Only the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radiation. And there's that, if administration did do it, the next administration would withdraw that. Air samples in Tokyo 270 times more contaminated with cesium than global weapons fallout peak. So, my goodness, please don't go to Tokyo. Please don't go to Japan. Just because I'm not your local TV station or your local media, I've showed you an overwhelming amount of documentation from them. All of these stories were aggregated from the mainstream idiot machine, right? And each one of these stories were based on 6, 7, 8, 9 mainstream articles. And typically underneath them there would be links to all the articles. None of these are conjectures. These are based on mainstream media, which is based a lot of times on conjecture. Workers say ground under a Fukushima plant is cracking and the radioactive steam is coming up. Melted cores may be moving out of the buildings. The ground is cracking and radioactive steam is coming up. That's called China syndrome. And the ground was cracked in 6 places, and the steam that was coming up on the stationary Geiger counters was 10 sieverts per hour. And I'm not going to find, I don't think I can find that stuff right now. So I'll have to... But remember, whenever you get one isotope, there's another 1,000 your Geiger counter won't read. Radioactive iodine in 50% of the children's thyroid, up to 35 millisieverts, 35,000 microsieverts. One microsievert would be considered an absolute nightmare pre-Fukushima. 35,000 now. They just don't care, see? They just don't care. Hi, everybody. Yeah, the cover-up of Fukushima, like, you know, you had a tsunami running through the country, and it was pretty easy to get caught up in that. That's in 2011. You had Steve Jobs died, which ate up. They purposely, you know, ran that thing to the ground in the news cycles for like weeks and weeks and weeks. You had Prince William get married. You had Kim Jong-il died. You had Mubarak was displaced out of Egypt. You had the English riots. You had, you had the biggest earthquake in history. Very visual stuff, right? All of these, there was a. If you look up the 10 biggest things that happened in 2011, you'll notice that each one of them were put in the media and they were ran into the ground in order to chew up the news cycles for many weeks each of them, right? Plutonium was no longer be measured, almost impossible for a normal person to detect the Geiger counter ineffective. Geiger counters are ineffective. So my Geiger counter is 123 counts per minute. That was gamma. Theoretically, you want to multiply that by 600 or 1,000. You know what I mean? I'm not kidding you, by the way. So instead of multiplying it by 1,000 to get the real number, multiply it by 600. So you're lowballing it. Because you're talking about 1,000 kinds of isotopes. TEPCO confirms the steam that came up underground in the reactor number 1 at 4.7 sieverts per hour, which is 20% more than June. So this is why the poll we have tonight is, should nuclear students, because they're going to grow up to be terrorists, right? When they graduate, they become nuclear terrorists. Instead of the homeless victims be sacrificed at the Fukushima, because it sounds crazy, but that's the right thing to do before they get a chance to turn into the pro-nuclear terrorists they will turn into. New York Times, government said nothing to fear in Tokyo. Then came the test results, 1.5 million atoms a square meter near the church in the capital. You can never clean that up. And the fact that they found that meant you need to multiply by 600 to get the real number. But there was another thing about Japan. They had built 19 incinerators in Fukushima Prefecture for burning radioactive debris. Now, they were grinding it up and shipping it to all the prefectures. Where if you had an incinerator, you were getting truckloads of grind up radioactive debris from Fukushima Prefecture, or a nuclear plant even. But it had its own incinerator, and then they actually built another large incinerator in a northwest corner. But they built 19 special, like 10, 12-story buildings, incinerators, in Fukushima Prefecture to burn radioactive rice and radioactive hay and everything else, radioactive tree branches, which just liberates everything right back into the environment. And because prevailing winds are blown across the Pacific, all the sulfur peroxide, hydrogen, buckyball isotopes would have been easily transported right across and around the planet immediately. Burning debris from Fukushima, and the problem they had, like they'd done this for 6 years, I think it was 7 years or something, and then the biggest problem they had now was they didn't know how to take apart the incinerators that they built because the incinerators were so radioactive. Like, the whole story is so convoluted. The map below from the year 2012 shows location where Fukushima debris was burned. It was really spread all over Japan during the first 3 years, 2011, 12, and 2013. It's actually way worse than this. They were shipping radioactive debris grinded up to burn in communities' incinerators. Today's incineration of Fukushima debris continues 19 locations in Fukushima Prefecture. That's where they built 19 skyscraper incinerators just to burn radioactive fallout in Japan. And you can't destroy it at 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures in incinerators. You're just going to liberate anthropogenic man-made isotopes back into the environment. It's absurd. Japan has done everything it can to kill this planet. $12 million yen, which was at that time was around 56,000 US dollars, to censor Twitter, which was just a couple of people. I was one of them. They'd kick me off. Being spent by the city starting to burn disaster debris. This is just one city. They arrested a professor who was protesting. Police beat him up too, right? Nuclear fusion market set to witness a significant growth by 2025, 2032. But there is no growth. I mean, currently, it's estimated at $351 billion in 2025. There is no fusion plants. So how can it be worth $351 billion? Because they're on the stock market and they don't have a product. You'll see the same thing with the small modular reactor companies are doing the same scam. Expected to reach $528 billion by 2032, but this is simply stock market speculations that should never exist. They don't have a fusion. You know, the big joke about fusion, it's in another 50 years they'll have it, right? And it's always been that way. And so they worked really hard in the last 50 years to crack that. Like if you took all of that money that they invested and all the time and energy and put it towards geothermal, we wouldn't need that gas, oil, or coal or nuclear, would we? And you wouldn't need only 1% of that to crack geothermal. The industry has sabotaged everybody's future and every species' future. And then all of these companies, these are all new companies, right? One of them's been around fairly long. The rest of them are brand like 3-4 years old. And they're on the stock market without a product, any hope of a product. And so any investors is buying into that who don't understand how it works, because what they're going to artificially inflate the stocks in a cycle like a moon cycle every 30 days or less. And so you got a window where all of a sudden the stocks will flatline and fall. And then the mom and pop investors who don't know nothing about this, who were sucked into this artificial inflation, will lose the majority of their investment. And so they're going to sell out and run away with whatever they can salvage. The price of the stocks are going to drop. That's when they're going to buy, the companies will buy into it again. And as it comes up, the new mom and pop investors who don't understand nuclear will see it as a rising stock that's doing incredibly well over a few weeks, and they'll jump on board. And it looks good for a couple of weeks, and then they're going to pull the bottom out again, and those small mom. And this is what they're all doing, the same thing. Right? And this trend in particular was cooked up at Conference of Parties 29, United Nations Conference of Parties, constipated parties, we like to call them. And the 14 biggest financial institutions worldwide, that's the game. They're doing the same thing with the small modular reactors. They're going on the stock exchange. The banks will buy 2-3 million stocks. Over 2 or 3 weeks, the stocks will fly up. All the small mom and pop investors who worked all their life for the money, for their investments, just retired, will throw their money into this hoping for a quick kickback. 2 weeks later, the big banks will sell back their shares and steal the artificially inflated stock resources that mom and pop put in there. They really are just a cruel, hateful, sadistic industry, isn't it? Focus on growth and future opportunities. This report is a go-to resource for industry leaders, investors, decision makers, without the insight that I just gave you, of course. The nuclear fusion market share has experienced rapid growth fueled by artificial inflation. What do you mean rising demand for a product that doesn't exist? There's not one of them got an application into a regulatory agency for a license to build a... So it's speculative, right? It's not even that. Why would you put your money into a stock? Because a stock, normally you can put your money in and leave it in there for a few years and grow a bunch of interest along the way, right? Dividends coming back to you. No, you're going to get robbed. Because unless you're part of financial institutions, you can't absorb a loss. Russia triggers high-level alert after United States nuclear reactor breakthrough shows cryomagnets, this is MIT nonsense, can repel a neutron bombardment. Again, this is about the fusion, right? And MIT has been promoting anything nuclear for over 90 years. And MIT, of course, was one of the first ones to come out and tell you Fukushima didn't happen. I remember back in the day when MIT and Yale and Stanford, Oxford, and everybody else started posting their lectures, their school lectures, online. And that was, back in that was just after YouTube started up. And it wasn't very high quality back there anyway. But I was studying all that stuff. That's what I listened to all day, every day, all night. And I remember this. It was the beginning of a semester anyway, and the students were introducing themselves on the first day, right? And this one student stands up. It was right at the beginning of the video, and she said, "I'm so and so. When did we start killing people?" And the professor started laughing and say, "No, we got lots of time for that stuff. This is just an introduction." He was laughing the whole time he was saying it. It was like she was looking for brownie points, and she got them too. But it does show you there's an agenda going on with these institutions, with these betrayals. Have made a groundbreaking discovery confirming that this... So this story is about tricking people into buying stocks into fusion, right? And it's quite a coincidence that that story came out the same as this story. So both of these stories are meant to trick people into buying stocks. That's all that's about. Like, you can have... There's, everything is a breakthrough when it comes to fusion. It's a technology that doesn't exist. But they can't... So the magnets are supposed to contain 300 million degree Fahrenheit temperatures. So it's not like they're doing a real experiment with a real fusion reactor and they're able to quantify those assertions, okay? It's strictly, right, it's meant to manipulate and deceive and coerce people into buying stocks, worthless stocks. This industry has the same gigawatts now as it did in 1996. There's no nuclear renaissance. There's no small modular reactor renaissance. There's no fusion renaissance. There's no nuclear fission renaissance. International young nuclear professionals. These weren't professionals. These were nuclear students. Visit research facilities in Osaka, which its water filtration, its sewage was incredibly radioactive. The bay is incredibly radioactive. International young nuclear professionals visit research facilities in Osaka. April 11, 2025, a group of young nuclear professionals from overseas, the Japan Atomic Industry Forum annual conference, toured university research facilities in Osaka prefectures from overseas. They're so slick. Nuclear reactor developer Terra Innovatum to go public via SPAC. Again, they're seeking to develop a small nuclear power, but they don't have one. They're unlikely. There's 100 other companies out there, have been out there a lot longer than them. They're brand new. They came out of the blue. They're going to be on the stock exchange with no product, with no application. They don't have a land to build something on. They don't have a team. They don't have the infrastructure, the supply chain. They're meant to rob the unsuspecting investors. That's all they're up to. They're up to nothing more than that. There's 100 of these companies out there right now. Why is this company any different? It's not. It's way behind. It's way beyond the other companies, which are all trying to scam the unsuspecting investors into buying stocks in a company with no product. They're terrorists. That's the best way to describe anybody in the nuclear industry is a terrorist. Any company that's looking at small modular reactors is in denial because geothermal can do anything they can do right away, not in 10, 20, 30 years. And nuclear doesn't share the power grid with geothermal or renewables. So if you do bring in nuclear, you're not going to be able to switch gears and go to renewables if there's an innovation that finally is allowed to break through the big censorship wall of silence they got installed worldwide. Could be used for hospitals, data centers, industrial sites, mining operations. Well, that's true for anything. Nuclear is not the only one that has those attributes. Why would you bother? If you're going to use it for a hospital, because you're talking about very small reactors, like many of these alleged small modular reactors, that's what you're talking about. But if you're going to look up how many small modular reactors are actually powering hospitals, you'll find none. But if you go and look at how many geothermal sites are powering hospitals and data centers, industrial sites, and mining operations, you'll find some. Not none, but some. Because they have to struggle for everything, where the nuclear industry doesn't struggle for nothing. They're put on a pedestal. They get all the money they want, really, and they still can't seem to do anything. Because 90% of the money goes to administration, right? One of several competitors seeking to develop it's 100 of them. It's set to go public by merging with the blank check firm GSR III Acquisition Corporation. It's another Ponzi scheme. And they have a pre-money equity valuation of $475 million in transactions that they can pawn on unsuspecting investors. But why would they have that equity valuation with a brand new company with no assets? It's absurd that they can exist. It's absurd that the stock market is letting these companies rob the unsuspecting investors, the people that actually worked for a living. Sam Altman, Oklo, Terrestrial, Bill Gates, Eris-backed X-Energy, Fluor Corporation, they are just disgusting. And NuScale, of course, is tied up, same as Nanoscale, with lawsuits, class action lawsuits from the previous investors that were stupid enough to invest in them. When you look at the performance and ability to raise capital of the companies so far, just a handful of small nuclear reactor projects have been completed only in Russia and China. Like, what are you talking about? Like the academic, the Russian... Let me get a picture of it. I got a picture. Media rarely shows you pictures when it comes to nuclear, do they? The academic. There you go, hopefully. I was sitting there, I should jump. There it is. That's a small modular reactor, is it? How many stories is that again? There's 3 at the blue. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Say 15-story edited water. How many stories is underneath water? It's 150-foot edited water, probably 50 feet under the water. So say it's a 150-foot building. That's not a small modular reactor. And not only that, recently we covered a story about the academic, the Russian. This, if you go look at the legacy of this contraption, it was an abandoned barge. It was repaired and painted up, and they built the reactors on it out of secondhand materials. It was an experiment to see if it would work. And then many countries wouldn't let them tow it through their countries. But recently they changed the fuel, and it's only a couple of years old, right? Recently they changed the fuel. And the media came out and reported on, they said the fuel is kept in a room, in storage. They refused to acknowledge that the fuel is in a fuel pool on that reactor contraption, that barge, which means it's vented, which means the community is being irradiated permanently with radioactive fallout, because the fuel will always be splitting atoms. That it would, wherever amount of homes it was powering, it does it by splitting atoms. Once you take the fuel out, it's still splitting those atoms. Now there's no containment. And so rather say it was in a storage pool on the academic, they said it was in a storage room. You don't store nuclear fuel in air. You store it under deep water and a special kind of water that has to be replaced all day and all night, forever, until you manage to be able to put it somewhere else. Right, so their holy grail, a small handful, which a handful is 5, of nuclear reactor projects have been completed, and only in Russia and China. No, Yes, China allegedly got a small one, but it's the same size. It's a massive reactor as the academic. Oh, we're still stuck on that, are we? I forgot that. I still haven't fixed that. My apologies. Because that's a really, really, really high quality picture. I could zoom right in on the windows with that picture. I probably could still do it. I can just move it in a second. Give me a second. But it's not the right shape, right? Because it's pinched off. Because what you were looking at was a setup I got for taking YouTube's video and the video that I record. Because YouTube is going to, you should always watch my videos in the first 12 hours. Because YouTube, the nuclear industry with YouTube is going to chop something out of that video. And if you go to my video section, you'll see a couple of minute video that they chopped out of the anniversary video for this year. And I got the video there that they chopped out of the video the next day, after 12 hours. As far as I know, I'm the only YouTuber they do that to. So this doesn't do it justice because it's pinched. And so I'll just walk back to the original one here. Should nuclear students, instead of the homeless victims, be sacrificed at the Fukushima meltdown? What have I got done now? I wonder. There we go. The company's micro-modular reactor design, trademarked by the name Solo, can deliver about 1 megawatt electricity using either standard grade or more specialized fuel, plutonium mixed oxide. It's not going to use standard grade fuel ever. It's going to use plutonium mixed oxide fuel. Because that's the only way they can get these contraptions to put out any kind of energy. And the emissions from the plutonium, the emissions from a typical fuel pool is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. The emissions from the plutonium mixed oxide is going to be just absurdly worse than that, and that is absurdly crazy, to 2 billion times industrial poison. Radioactive fallout is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. The reactor is encased in concrete and uses helium gas for cooling. Helium. Remember a few decades ago when he said they had no more helium? They needed it for all the reactors and the dry cast, because they put helium in a dry cast of fuel, right? Hard cases. They spoil even children's birthday parties. But just being... The transaction is expected to close in the second half of the year, with Terra Innovations being traded at the Nasdaq. I'm sorry, I pronounced that wrong. Innovatum to begin trading on the Nasdaq under the symbol NKLH. It doesn't have a product. It's highly unlikely. There's 100 other small modular reactor companies. I'm not going to say they're advanced, because as far as I can tell, none of them are trying to come up with an actual product. None of them have an application into the regulatory agencies. Group projects 100 gigawatt rise in global nuclear power capacity across the next decade. Really? They're going to build 10 reactors a year. Well, something like 80% of the reactors worldwide are supposed to go offline in the next decade. Now they're talking about small modular reactors, so they're talking about building 600-700 small modular reactors in the next decade. They don't have a single application to a regulatory agency. So when you develop a reactor, there's a whole, just, a million pieces of paper for the design, basically. And so the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, when they finally get that, they have to hire 300 or 400 people to go through that million pieces of paper. And it's not your average person they're going to hire. Very specialized people. Going to read the schematics of a nuclear plant. And then so they're going to, it takes 3 or 4 years to get through that process after they receive it. And none of them received it yet, so it's not going to be happening in 10 years. Like, you can't build it without the application. And the first one they're going to build, when they finally, they'll submit the application, a million pieces of paper. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission will hire 300 or 400 people. They'll go through the application. They'll send it back with modifications they want made, and this will go back and forth. So you're looking at 10 years down the road. So now they got a design after 10 years that they agree upon. They say, okay, you can go ahead and build an experimental reactor at one of the national laboratories. So then, now they got to raise the money and they got to build it, which, if you know anything about the nuclear industry, is going to be 4 times over budget and take at least 3 times as long as they predicted. And because you never built a successful one yet, it could take a lot longer. So you're 15, 20 years down the road. By the time you build one, you run it you run it through its process, you find the flaws, you redesign the flaws out of it, you make the adjustments. You're 10, 15 years down the road. You're 25 years down the road now. This is meant because you got another company just about to go on the stock exchange for small modular reactors that don't exist. This is only meant to prop up the fusion and the small modular reactor Ponzi scheme. That's all that's meant to do, right? To trick and deceive and manipulate and coerce the vulnerable investors into buying these stocks. That's all you're seeing. It's not even speculation. It's pure posturing with evil intent. Capacity gains will be tied to advancements in deployment of the non-small modular reactors. They don't have license into the regulatory agencies. And so if you're talking about small modular reactors, you're talking 600 to 1,000 reactors. Right? We're not talking about 1 gigawatt reactors. We're talking about small modular reactors. And the last company, scam artist, is a megawatt. There's 1,000 megawatts in a gigawatt. So 100,000 of those small modular reactors. Where are you going to get the police to protect these things? How are you going to, is there enough farmland out there to sit all these things? Because that's where they build them, on farmland. Because the radioactive fallout that way can be sold in supermarkets. It looks like food, right? The capacity gains will be tied to advancements in the deployment of small modular reactors, which don't exist. Right, so the fusion of small modular reactors are out there hunting for unsuspecting investors. Drills aimed at boosting the readiness if Iran and United States nuclear talks fail. So it should say Israeli drills are aimed at boosting readiness if Iran and United States nuclear talks fail. We know they're going to fail. And Israel's pretty stupid, but I don't think they're stupid enough to attack Iran again. Iran has made it very clear they're not going to tolerate it another single time. And they also back that up with statistics of the drones, the Scud missiles, the hypersonic missiles, the radar jamming equipment that they're able to use against the fighter jets. Before the Israeli fleet makes it out of Iran, airplanes, they won't have fields to land in because they'll be bombed into non-existence by Iran. They won't have any power anywhere when they get back to Israel because all that'll be knocked out. And they won't have any nuclear plants left and nuclear weapons left in Israel because they'll be knocked out in the first wave. And Iran can sustain thousands of very sophisticated drones that are deploying an unusual technique where the missiles and drones will come in and they'll release dummy missiles and drones, and that will take up the resources of the defense system, and then they'll unleash high speed, supersonic speed GPS missiles to take out their marine facilities, their military bases. And you notice the last two times that Iran struck back at Israel, it struck the military bases, not the civilians like Israel does. It struck the military bases. Israel knows they can't beat them. That's where they get the British, the French, and the United States. But even together, they're not going to win that battle. It's simply not going to happen, because you have thousands of miles of deep, very deep, underground cities and tunnels in Iran that are plugged with 20 years of weapons. They said, what was it that they spent on the first volley? The United States and Israel spent something like $6 billion on anti-missile systems trying to knock Iran's missiles out of the sky, and failed. Iran only sent the old drones, the old missiles. It's a very expensive lesson that apparently they didn't learn. But what you're looking at is just posturing from Israeli defense forces. Warned they are planning a serious, significant response. So is Iran. Iran's planning a catastrophic response. Israel attacks Iran's nuclear facility. Iran's going to take out Israel's nuclear facility before Israel's plans land. They have to. They have to show a deterrent, or Israeli will never stop, right? And after having two kicks at the can, the third one is going to be bad. Danish Chambers of Commerce, nuclear power is a dead end for the Danish. Interest groups warn against including nuclear power in the Danish energy planning, contradicting a think tank's conclusion favoring the controversial energy form. And the think tanks are accused of misrepresentation. How think tanks arrived at the cheap nuclear power in Denmark. Both of those stories were subscription only. Calculations, one of the professors thinks the calculations are based on unrealistically low interest rates. It doesn't matter. What nuclear, 90% of the money that goes into nuclear is ripped off through administration. That's just Achilles tendon of the nuclear industry, is that they steal 90% of the money. That's why Westinghouse went bankrupt. U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission leader joins a nuclear company as vice president of regulatory affairs. It's just lobbying, right? But it's the worst type of lobbying, isn't it? There's the checks and balances, and now they're going to take all that information to a nuclear company and teach them how to get around checks and balances. Now, she got the job because she done so many favors for the country, and the company's called The Nuclear Company. Remember Ultra Safe Nuclear that went bankrupt and stole all the investors' money recently? This could be the same company, the nuclear company, coming back for another kick at the can to rob the investors again. And she got the job. That's the kickback. She's been there 30 years. So she's done some dirty stuff for a lot of dirty companies. And it's time for her to reap her reward legally, right? She'll leave the non-regulatory agency with a big pension, a full pension, and perks. And now she got a cushy job there where she just makes a few phone calls here and there and sets up meetings. And she might participate in it for kicks, but this is a kickback. That job there is the kickback for dirty stuff that she's already done, the nuclear company. Emerged from stealth mode in 2024. First off, there's 100 companies already ahead of her. Why are you bothering with that company? Well, she's the insider, but she's only got the job because she's already gave that company all kinds of advantages. She's entrenched with the regulatory agency for 30 years or something. And that's her kickback coming in finally, right? Using proven licensed technology. In other words, they're not even going to try to come up with a new technology. So why even exist when they have all these other companies in the first place? Because that's part of the good old boys. Nuclear war could kill 5 billion in 72 minutes. And you say nuclear winter. When you talk about nuclear winter, think about the Soviet Union. Biggest bomb was equal to 3,800 Nagasaki plutonium bombs going off at the one time. 3,800. That's a nuclear war. We didn't see nuclear winter. The sun wasn't blocked out. We've seen the Bikini Atolls, the Marshall Islands rather, where Castle Bravo was equal to 1,000, 1,500 Nagasaki bombs going off at the same time. We've seen lots and lots of megaton bombs going off, right? A megaton is 1,000 kilotons, and Nagasaki, Hiroshima says around 15 kilotons. And we still don't see no nuclear war. There are over 2,000 weapons, some of them equal to 3,800 Nagasaki bombs set off. There is no nuclear winter. And that the nuclear winter paper was written by 2 academics. It wasn't supported by any other. It's the same as net zero. That was a paper written by Miles Allen, for instance. Or the carbon footprint was written by BP Oil Public Relation Campaign to blame you for using oil instead of them for having an old ship that wasn't seaworthy. Or James Hansen, who spent 15 minutes in front of Congress and claimed the hockey stick climate change. Or Brocker, who... so all of these papers were snatched by United Nations and then weaponized against humanity and is now a burden on humanity and is causing massive inflation that shouldn't exist. Only 2 countries, New Zealand and Australia, may be safe due to their ability to grow food during a nuclear winter. But from all the practical nuclear wars we've seen, which is nuclear testing, it's the same bomb, the same radioactive fallout. And if the Soviet Union's biggest bomb, 3,800 Nagasaki bombs going off at the same time, doesn't count as a nuclear war, then you're certainly not being honest. You're certainly dishonest, right? Nuclear diplomacy on whole Iran-United States technical talks postponed. Yeah, but only till the weekend. Delay was announced to the U.S. Treasury Department Office of Foreign Assets, probably because of Easter weekend or something, right? I don't know. I don't know. Russian troops trained in Iran for ballistic missiles. U.S. warns of severe response. Russian troops trained in Iran for ballistic missiles. So this is Iran's missiles we're talking about. Dozens of Russian military personnel are currently receiving training in Iran on the FAT 360 close-up ballistic missile system. 2 European intelligence sources told Reuters, which is the CIA, right? The deal includes not only the FAT 360 system, but also another Iranian ballistic missile system known as Abbotbale, developed by the Aerospace Industry Organization. And I wonder what they traded off for that. That's going to be used against Israel. United States National Security Council warned of a severe response from the United States, NATO allies, and the G7 partners if Iran proceeds with transferring these weapons to Russia. A severe response. Again, none of this rhetoric is going to protect Israel from Iran, that I can see. Israel has no hope of stopping Iran if Iran retaliates, and after decades of being destroyed through all kinds of proxies, wars, and sanctions, and air, land, sea, and embargoes, Iran's not doing it no more. They're not sitting and taking it anymore. So, I don't see Israel putting their foot in that trap. I think, I'm going to say they're smart enough. I'm going to say that because they've never fought a real military, and the reason being is because they can't win. Right? They don't have the practice. They don't have. They don't. All they do is shoot fish in a barrel, like Palestine. Right? They've never had a real war. And what Iran done to them in just 2 little episodes has never been done to Israel before. Israel has never been struck hard, and the proxies that Iran is supporting, which is the only thing that's salvaging fractions of Palestine. If Iran unleashes on Israel, Israel has no hope. They lose all power. They're going to lose all their nuclear plants. They're going to lose their docks, their unloading facilities. They're going to lose their filtration facilities. They're going to lose their oil. They're going to lose all the small bases that they're using are going to be targeted. And those targets are already programmed in to the seemingly endless fleets of drones and missiles that Iran has. They can't get at these. Even nuclear weapons are not going to get at 90% of the weapons that Iran has ready to go. That's the consensus, right? That I'm listening to and I'm seeing from the intelligence agencies followed closely over the last year and a half, 2 years. Sandia's unique role in nuclear deterrent. Lead systems integrator for the nuclear weapons program. The system integrator ensures that the many complex parts of the weapons and its delivery vehicle work together flawlessly. This is Sandia's National Laboratory. It's built on one of the biggest aquifers in that part of the country. Had multiple experimental reactors melt down. Have dumped a catastrophic amount. And that's a massive site. I can't remember the square mileage, but it's like 5,000 or 10,000 scientists work there. Sandia does not have design authority for the nuclear explosive packages that are controlled by Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory or the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Los Alamos National Laboratory is on a massive aquifer. It's like the size of the Great Lakes. And they've already spent, I can't remember the real numbers, $19 million, I know, at one point, on trying to mitigate more nuclear waste going down into that aquifer. But that aquifer feeds around 25,000 farms downstream, right? You know, in the infancy of these national laboratories, the Manhattan projects, they were dumping 45-gallon barrels into those big rivers. And if they didn't sink, then they shot them. And that never came to light until 5 years ago or something. We covered it when they were dredging because of big floods, right? And so they were dredging. They were bringing up all these 45-gallon barrels. They didn't know what they were, and they were getting crushed open, and all this powder was coming out. And it turned out those barrels in particular were cesium-137 or something. Yeah, remember them stories? It was 5 or 6 years ago we covered that stuff. It's really something what we've covered over the years. It really is special, isn't it? Like, I got a pretty good memory. but I'm a pack rat too. Most of the time, we're not the decision maker. We are there to make sure the decision is made. They make every decision. They're decision makers for the dumping of the nuclear waste all over Sandina. I mean, Hanford is one of the national laboratories too, and they dumped 450 billion gallons of nuclear sludge, splitting atom stuff, directly into the soil, unlined trenches. 42 miles of unlined trenches that is uphill, on a hill, that goes straight down to the Columbian River. And if you took that 450 billion gallons, because it's hard to have context when you think of it as 450 billion gallons, it doesn't resonate for the average person, or 99.999%. But if you look at it in the context of a 6-foot wide aquarium, so if you took a 6-foot wide aquarium of nuclear sludge, and it was 518 feet tall and wrapped around the entire planet more than once, that's what Hanford, alone, not counting Idaho National Laboratories or Los Alamos National Laboratories or Sardina or anywhere else or all the rest of the national laboratories. It's just that one facility for that one small moment in its legacy had dumped directly into the soil, and they have droughts, they have massive storms, they're right on the Columbian River. And there was another story we covered about the Columbian River, just shy of Hanford, a few miles away from Hanford, that the shoreline was at 70 sieverts per hour. And 3 to 4 sieverts will melt your organs if you're there for, say, 5 or 10 minutes. And you'll end up dying that day or that week from that exposure because your organs will continue to melt. But 70 sieverts on the shoreline means that if you went past that area in a boat drifting, looking for salmon, which is salmon rod, you probably got a lethal dose and would have died that day, that week, or that month. Most of the time, we're not the decision makers. Which means some of the times they are, right? Why Sandina? Sandina applies the principle of always never across a weapons system, meaning when the authorities, the crazies, when authorized for use, the weapons will always work as intended. And they will never work under any other circumstances. And the obligation requires close collaboration between Sandina and the military-industrial complex. They're not neutral in any sense or shape, right? They're part of the problem. You can't use these weapons. That's the crazy part about the whole story, is you can't use the weapons. You contaminated the entire planet for something you can't use. And then you spend all your resources on submarines. And like these planes that are up there flying in the stratosphere, or upper troposphere, that'll stay up there for like 72 hours, they burn $11 million worth of fuel. But the tanker that's bringing them fuel is burning a massive amount of fuel because they're fully loaded. They have enlarged engines, huge engines, to carry a massive amount of fuel at high altitude. And so when you start putting all of this into the equation, the maintenance work that's necessary after 72 hours of straight flights, the maintenance for the whole fuel cycle to get the fuel up in the air and bring it to them. This is a parasite industry that is now completely, has to consume everything and every resource and every precious resource on the planet in order to sustain itself. And it has no qualms in doing that. Just so they can go home and say they're special. Nuclear Regulatory Commission to hold a public meeting in Oak Ridge regarding Clinch River nuclear site plan. It's expected to get a construction permit application from the Tennessee Valley Authority to build the boiling water reactor 300 small modular reactor. It's a 240-foot building. It's a 24-story building at the Clinch River nuclear site. A 24-story building How can you, in any shape, and they're going to be using plutonium mixed oxide fuel in that creature too. And then it's a massive small modular reactor. It's the best thing to call these things. Massive small modular reactors. I got a special night tonight. Tonight's special. Tonight's different than any other night. Tonight one of my dreams will come true. James Lucid has posted another song, a very short one, but it's 300 anti-nuclear songs that he's posted. It's absurd. It's fantastic on top of that. It's an absurd amount of work. Just sit there and try to write 5 songs. Don't worry about the music or the videos. Try to write 5 songs. And tell me the stress that is. And he wrote it on topics that, like if a nuclear professor goes and watches and listens to those songs, it's going to blow their mind. Because even they can't comprehend the enormous amount of time and energy and effort it takes to do something like 5 songs. James Lucid has produced, officially now, 300 songs. That is so crazy. I was kind of thinking he might not produce one for a couple of days. Now, it's a lot of stress. I put an extra enormous amount of stress on him by kind of making a big deal out of this too, right? Because now he's like, oh shit, I got to come up with a good song for my last song. But you don't, right? You can put out anything. It doesn't matter. The fact that you produced 300 of them is just absurd. It's wonderful. It's an amazing, we don't get too many amazing moments, you know. We don't. And so I'm really looking forward to this. And so the first song we started out each night and the last songs is James's music, because he's produced more anti-nuclear music than the entire planet combined many times over. So first off, give a big hit over here. Boink. We're going to close the poll down after, so we got a couple of minutes before we're going to do that, so don't forget to get your votes in. And hi everybody, Huxford. We're going to play I guess it's the song. Sometimes he does other stuff too, right? It's really cool. He does all the videos and the music. And he's the first person in history to do this with artificial intelligence. And so he's got a couple of major firsts in history on his belt that I think he should be incredibly proud of. And we're actually going to do something special now. It might take a little while for me to put together a presentation on that. But we're definitely going to showcase his music. And his earlier music, man, that stuff is fantastic too. I happen to love the videos, right? So we're going to close that poll after. And when the show is over, this is James's site. And there's our, and he's only got one view on it, which makes it all that more sweeter. And we've never heard this. I'm going to adjust the audio on my side for the song, so you don't have to worry about that. First, I'm going to make sure we got high quality. First, make sure you get high quality before I get it in the full page. A big congratulations to James. I know there's a whack of stress goes into this video, because I've been talking about this for a while, so it's got to get to him at some point, right? I've made a pretty big deal, because it is a big deal, but I've made a pretty big deal out of it. And just give me a second here, actually. Just give me a moment. I know I forgot something. I'll do that again. Do. I don't know what's going on there. I guess it doesn't matter. And we'll get that next time. All right, so have a great night. Hugs for everybody. Big shout out. Big hugs for James. I know the stress must have been crazy. Don't worry about it if you didn't get a perfect song. It's impossible for me to do it. We'll see everybody on the next show. I'm not sure if I'm back tomorrow night. I barely made it tonight, so have a great night and great day tomorrow. Hugs for everybody.
The core ran low beneath control, coolant thin through weakened flow. Design, fail safes cut, no safety line. Graphite tips approved without review. Inserted first before the screw. Displace the coolant, spike the rate. AC5 press, but it was far too late. The void collapsed, the gain unmasked, the margin gone, the spike surpassed. They read the chart, not what it meant, and watched containment circumvent. They hit AC5. They hit